A passenger called a black CEO his servant and demanded he fetch him water, but the moment the pilot refused to back him up changed everything. He thought humiliating another man would earn him respect. He didn't realize the person he mocked built the company that paid for his ticket. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always meets its reckoning. Tell this man to fetch me some water. The voice cut through the low hum of settling passengers like a blade. Cabin lights hadn't even fully dimmed yet when the words were flung across the aisle with careless precision. Nathan Corrin didn't look up right away. He'd just powered on his laptop, a slim, gray model streaked with fingerprint smudges from hours of use. His thumb hovered above the trackpad, frozen by the weight of what he'd just heard. Across from him, in seat 4B, lounged a man with a glass of bourbon and the smug confidence of someone who'd never been corrected in public. Logan Darren leaned back, legs stretched, chin tilted upward like the leather headrest was his throne. His navy pinstripe suit glistened under the overhead light, sharp creases suggesting it had been pressed only minutes before boarding. The flight attendant, young, nervous, eyes darting, stood between them with an apologetic half-smile. "Sir," he began gently, unsure which one he was addressing. "I think there's a misunderstanding." Logan raised a hand, dismissive. "I said, fetch me some water. That's what you're here for, right?" He jerked a thumb toward Nathan as though pointing at furniture. "Get him to do it." "Looks like staff." The cabin hushed. Even the zip of a closing briefcase somewhere in the back stalled mid-motion. Nathan slowly lifted his gaze from the screen. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes, sharp and steady, locked onto Logan like twin lenses adjusting to focus. "I believe there's been a mistake," Nathan said, his voice low and composed. "I'm a passenger." "Not crew." Logan chuckled, a dry, condescending rasp that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sure you are," he said, "and I'm the king of Arcadia." The attendant stammered again, but Nathan raised a hand gently. "It's fine," he said. Then, calmly turning toward Logan, he added, "Dr. Nathan Corrin, CEO of Avaris Systems." That name triggered a faint murmur a few rows back. Someone clearly recognized it, but Logan remained unimpressed. "Oh, a doctor, huh?" he sneered. "Doctor of baggage handling? Or just making up titles now to sound important?" Nathan didn't respond. He simply returned to his laptop and resumed typing with mechanical grace. His pulse was steady, but there was a faint tremble in his jaw, barely visible. But there. Not rage, not shame. Something colder, something that remembered. He had endured insults before. Disrespect wasn't foreign, but this moment was different. There was something performative in Logan's tone, something that fed off attention. The kind of man who'd sneer at a uniform but kneel for a tailored suit. The kind of man who mistook restraint for inferiority. The other passengers began shifting uncomfortably. A businessman in 4C pretended to focus on his newspaper, though his eyes darted sideways. A teenager in the row behind slipped out his phone, camera lens barely peeking over the seat back. No one intervened. No one spoke. The silence in the cabin was thick, not ignorance, but fear of proximity to conflict. Nathan's hands moved slowly over his keyboard now. His body was in the seat, but his thoughts had taken flight. He thought about the document on his screen, a final draft proposal for a federal ethics commission outlining behavioral accountability for biotech partnerships. He was supposed to finish it on this flight. Tight deadline, high stakes. Yet here he was, being ordered to fetch water like an errand boy. His gaze shifted slightly to the window, where the jet bridge was slowly retracting. They were still grounded, but not for long. "You still haven't brought my water," Logan called out mockingly, as though the moment had reset itself. "Servant." A few audible gasps fluttered from nearby seats. The attendant flushed red, his hands twitching by his sides. "Sir, please," he whispered, bending toward Logan. "I told you, he's not." "Then why's he dressed like he's about to clean the lavatory?" Logan spat, clearly enjoying himself. Nathan said nothing. He didn't look away this time. Instead, he studied Logan, every wrinkle of contempt around the eyes, the loose smirk that signaled immunity from consequence, the shallow breath of someone who expected obedience. A part of him, the scientist, the strategist, cataloged it all. But another part, the human one, felt a flicker, not of pain, not even of anger. It was something quieter, heavier, a recognition that no matter his status, no matter the speeches or panels or handshakes behind velvet curtains, there would always be men like this, and rooms that would let them speak. Nathan gently closed his laptop, the magnetic click oddly final. He placed it on the tray table and folded his hands. Logan noticed the movement and chuckled again. "That's better. Keep your hands where I can see them, servant." The captain's voice interrupted the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Dorian Rell. Welcome aboard Meridian Flight 742 with non-stop service to Arcadia City." Nathan barely heard the words. His eyes had not left Logan. "We'll be cruising at 36,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and thank you for choosing Meridian Air." The seatbelt signs dinged. The hum of engine pressure began to rise. Nathan leaned slightly back into his seat. Still silent. Still calm. But something had shifted. Not on his face, not in his posture, somewhere deeper. A calculation had begun, quiet and unseen, like a storm far off the coast that has just turned toward land. And as the plane began taxiing, Nathan looked once more out the window, past the tarmac, past the terminal, toward the horizon, before closing his eyes for a single moment. In the stillness, the words echoed again. Some insults don't echo, they ignite. "Say it again. This time, call me sir." Logan's voice pierced through the low hum of the aircraft cabin, laced with mockery and smug satisfaction. Heads shifted slightly in their seats. Some eyes flicked toward the aisle. Others pretended not to hear. Dr. Nathan Corrin didn't look up. His fingers hovered above the keyboard of his laptop, the glow of the screen painting his face in pale blue light. His expression was unreadable, neither angered nor shaken, just still. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he did not respond. Logan leaned back in his seat, stretched his legs arrogantly into the aisle, and chuckled loud enough for 2 rows to hear. "I asked you a question, sir? Or is that too big a word for you?" His exaggerated pronunciation of the word sir was a deliberate insult, each syllable dripping with the glee of someone who believed himself untouchable. A passenger across the aisle, a younger man in a navy sweater, hesitated, then quietly tilted his phone upward to begin recording. His movements were slow, cautious, but his eyes burned with disbelief. The rest of the cabin remained stiff, men adjusting their ties, tapping through screens, looking anywhere but at the unfolding humiliation. Nathan inhaled slowly through his nose. He wasn't unaware. He was calculating. The seatbelt sign still glowed overhead, the plane barely having leveled off from its ascent. Outside, the clouds moved like smoke across a pale sky. Inside, the air thickened, not from pressure, but from tension. Logan spoke again, louder now. "Is this how Meridian trains its staff?" No courtesy, no titles. This man should be reprimanded. He jabbed a finger toward Nathan without looking at him, as if pointing out a misplaced object. A flight attendant approached quickly, mid-30s, uniform crisp, eyes darting nervously between the 2 men. "Sir, I need to clarify. This passenger is not a crew member," he said carefully. "He's a guest, like yourself." Logan scoffed. "Then he should dress like one." "You see gray and think that's authority? That's a janitor's suit." A few passengers flinched. The man with the phone lowered it for a second, unsure if things were escalating too quickly. Nathan finally looked up, not at Logan, but at the flight attendant. "It's fine," he said quietly, voice even. "Let him speak. He's revealing more than he knows." The attendant paused, unsure whether to stay or leave. Nathan gave a slight nod of reassurance. Reluctantly, the man walked back toward the galley, his posture tense, eyes sweeping the row once more before vanishing behind the curtain. Just then, the captain's voice came over the intercom, casual and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. Weather looks calm ahead, and we'll keep you updated. In the meantime, we ask that everyone remain respectful to fellow passengers and crew as we continue our journey. Thank you for flying Meridian." The announcement was vague, almost too general. Logan seized the moment like it was validation. "Did you hear that?" he said loudly. "Even the captain wants some discipline back here." Nathan's gaze shifted subtly toward the ceiling speakers, then back to his screen. The captain hadn't named him, not even a hint of clarification. It was the kind of silence that didn't protect, it betrayed. He closed his laptop with measured calm. The hum of the engines vibrated softly through the floor. Men scrolled on tablets, some now stealing longer glances. One of the passengers in the back shook his head slowly and whispered something to his seatmate. But no one spoke aloud. Logan leaned over the armrest, a leer curling on his lips. "You're real quiet." "I like that in a worker." Nathan's eyes met his for the first time. "There's a difference," he said slowly, "between quiet and watchful." Logan blinked, then smirked. "Oh, you're one of those word guys." Real poetic Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his bag and withdrew a pen, flipping to a notepad. He began to write, calm, precise strokes. Names, seat numbers, remarks, even facial expressions. Not out of anger, but for accuracy. A few rows ahead, a man in a brown coat looked over his shoulder and nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before turning back around. Nathan registered it, confirmation that someone else saw. He turned the pen sideways and tapped it against the page. Logan, perhaps sensing he was no longer entertaining, shifted back in his seat and muttered under his breath, "You'll remember who owns the sky." Nathan wrote one final sentence, then underlined it twice. "You forget who watches the descent." The rest of the flight passed with cold civility. No further outbursts, no more shouting. Just the heavy, watchful silence of a cabin filled with men pretending not to know what they'd witnessed. And one man, Nathan, taking note of every silence louder than the insult itself. In the terminal several cities away, Nathan's assistant at Avers Systems, Kellen Merrick, refreshed a booking confirmation screen. The same airline, the same route, 2 days from now. This time, it wouldn't be just passengers in the cabin. Back on the plane, Nathan folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his jacket. He didn't speak again for the rest of the flight. The storm had already been scheduled. It was only waiting for the right sky. Turbulence struck without warning, rattling the overhead bins and making glasses clink in their holders. The plane dipped slightly before stabilizing, sending a wave of unease through the cabin. Seatbelts tightened with startled jerks. Trays wobbled. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Logan Darren took the moment as an invitation for spectacle. He raised his glass high, letting the amber liquid inside slosh perilously close to the rim. "Well, what now?" he bellowed, voice laced with mockery. "Am I to spill this on myself? Or do servants still exist in this sky?" The jab was unmistakable. He turned his eyes sharply toward Nathan Corrin, then jutted his chin forward like a man issuing a challenge. "Hold it, would you?" Logan said, extending the glass and gesturing with exaggerated courtesy. "Since that's what you people are good for." The surrounding passengers stiffened. Even those who'd previously chosen to look away now turned, uncertain whether to intervene or simply bear witness. A low murmur rose and quickly died as the tension swallowed every polite instinct in the cabin. A young male flight attendant rushed over. "Sir, please, Dr. Corrin is not—" Logan waved him off dismissively. "I know who he is," he said, grinning with too many teeth. "A liar playing dress-up. I know a faker when I see one." The attendant reached for the drink, but Logan slapped his hand away, not violently, but just enough to make the contact feel offensive. "I said he should take it," Logan insisted, loud enough to reach several rows. A line had been crossed. Nathan rose from his seat, not with anger, not with trembling hands or sharp breath, but with the poise of a man who'd already made his decision 5 minutes ago. His face was unreadable, a mask of composure drawn tight over something deeper. Without speaking, he stepped into the narrow aisle and walked past Logan without sparing him a glance. His stride was steady, unaffected by the jolt of the earlier turbulence or the weight of eyes following him. He reached the cockpit door, pressed the intercom button, and waited. After a brief pause, the door unlocked with a soft buzz. Captain Dorian Rell appeared in the threshold, expression wary. "I'd like a word," Nathan said evenly. The door closed behind them. Inside the cockpit, muffled voices exchanged quietly. The co-pilot, young, pale, focused, glanced back once toward the door, then returned to his instruments. 3 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. Nathan stepped out, his posture unchanged, his eyes calm but heavy with thought. He returned to his seat silently, sat down, and opened his laptop again, though the screen remained dim. He wasn't working. He was waiting. Logan watched him, perplexed. Something in Nathan's movements no longer matched the image he'd constructed. He tried to laugh it off. "Did the captain scold you? Or did he just hand you your new apron?" Nathan looked up, just slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. He leaned forward. His voice, when he spoke, was low enough that only those in the nearby rows could hear. And yet it rang with the weight of something far larger than the words themselves. "You're behaving as if you own this air," he said, "but you forget the ground is still waiting." Logan blinked. For a moment, the usual smirk faltered. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. There was no sarcasm waiting on his tongue, no insult sharp enough to cut through the ice in Nathan's tone. He leaned back, scoffing half-heartedly. "Empty words," he muttered to no one in particular, adjusting his tie as if that might restore his sense of control. The rest of the cabin remained quiet. Even the engine hum seemed softer, muffled by something unspoken. Moments later, Captain Rell's voice came over the speakers, clear, clipped, and formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for continued cooperation under our airline's code of conduct. All passengers are reminded to treat one another with civility. Thank you." The announcement ended without fanfare, without names, without blame. But for those who had witnessed the exchange, it said enough. Logan chuckled and leaned back smugly, interpreting the message as a vague rebuke to the cabin in general. He had no idea that Nathan, during his brief time in the cockpit, had quietly identified himself as one of the architects of Meridian Air's upcoming ethics renewal program, a silent partner whose influence extended far beyond a passenger manifest. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, breathing deep through his nose. Logan had insulted a man whose job was to detect systemic rot, not just endure it. He had thrown a stone without asking who built the foundation he stood on, and that, Nathan knew, would be the beginning of his undoing. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits behind patience. The drink hit the keyboard with a sharp splash, amber liquid sliding into the cracks between the keys, sizzling faintly as it met the still-warm processor. Nathan froze for half a second, staring down at his now ruined laptop. Across the aisle, Logan smirked, holding the empty glass loosely in his fingers as if nothing had happened. "Oops," Logan said, his tone thick with mockery. "Guess your little servant tool wasn't waterproof." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The usual hum of quiet conversations and overhead fans dimmed, as if the air itself recoiled from the hostility. Nathan rose from his seat, his movements slow, controlled, but taut, like a rope pulled to its breaking point. His eyes didn't leave Logan's, but his voice didn't come. Not yet. The flight attendant, A young man with dark circles under his eyes and a meridian badge reading Kyle rushed over. "Sir, please remain calm," he said, his gaze darting nervously between the two men. Logan leaned back in his seat and chuckled, tossing the empty glass onto his tray. It was a joke. Can't the help take a little joke these days? Two passengers, one in a leather jacket, the other wearing noise-canceling headphones around his neck, stood without a word. One of them placed a steadying hand on Logan's shoulder. The other moved between the seats as a physical barrier. "Don't touch me," Logan barked, but his voice cracked under the weight of too many eyes on him. Nathan didn't speak. He simply crouched beside the seat, gently lifting the dripping laptop from the tray. Sticky trails of scotch clung to his fingers. He reached down and retrieved a napkin, using it not to clean the machine, but to dry his palms. Slowly, methodically. He placed the laptop under the seat, retrieved a slim notepad from his carry-on, and sat back down without a word. Captain Dorian Rell's voice soon came over the intercom, flat and disengaged. "Cabin crew, please return to standard duties. Any disturbances will be addressed after landing." There was no mention of names, no disciplinary tone, just a sterile attempt to move past the moment. Nathan felt it like a second insult, sharper than the first. The captain had seen the tension, the escalation. He'd been informed, and yet no reprimand, no command for restraint, not even a show of neutrality. Just avoidance. Nathan looked around. The passengers pretended not to watch, but he saw the sidelong glances, the phones discreetly angled. One man in the back row had been recording since the outburst began. Nathan registered him with a brief nod, a mental note. Kyle lingered, clearly uneasy. "Dr. Corrin, I'm sorry about the equipment. If there's anything we can—" "That won't be necessary," Nathan said, his voice cool, nearly detached. "Please return to your duties." Kyle hesitated, then stepped away, his face marked by discomfort and a silent apology he wasn't brave enough to speak aloud. Logan, meanwhile, folded his arms and smirked, emboldened by the captain's inaction. "Maybe next time, travel with insurance, Doc," he said with a mock grin. Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he clicked his pen and began writing in the notepad. His handwriting was swift and firm. Names, timestamps, direct quotes. Witness rows, cabin crew reactions, seating layout. The act of recording gave him focus, carved clarity from chaos. He felt the weight of his wrist subtly shift. Inside the elegant watch strapped to his skin was a micro-recorder built into the dial, a quiet gift from Avaris's prototype department. It had been running since the moment he boarded. The insults, the laughter, the silence of the flight staff, it was all there. The smell of alcohol and damp electronics filled the immediate space. Around him, murmurs returned, cautious but present. The passengers were no longer just observers. They had become silent participants in something they didn't yet understand. Logan reclined with a satisfied sigh, eyes closed, lips still curled in smug amusement. "Tell your boss to get you a new one," he muttered. Nathan paused his pen. He looked at Logan for a long moment, not with anger, but with something colder, something that didn't need to shout. "You think this flight is yours to command," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "But there's a reason the sky doesn't belong to anyone. It reminds men like you that altitude doesn't erase gravity." Logan opened one eye, confused. "What?" Nathan returned to his writing. For the next hour, the cabin remained quiet. Logan stopped speaking. Perhaps it was fatigue, or perhaps something in Nathan's silence had unsettled him more than he realized. The tension, however, never fully left. It hovered like static, just beneath the surface. Nathan continued to document. Every 10 minutes he checked the watch recorder's indicator, a subtle green glow hidden beneath the dial. Still running, still capturing. He knew now that this wasn't a single insult or a momentary cruelty. It was a symptom of something deeper, something institutional. And it wasn't just Logan. It was the pilot who chose neutrality over accountability, the system that hesitated in the face of arrogance, the passengers who sat still, some afraid, some indifferent, some complicit by silence. But Nathan wasn't angry. He was ready. He reached down once more, pressing a button beneath the armrest that activated the secure signal transmission from his watch. The files would begin syncing silently to Avaris's off-site legal cloud. Every insult, every omission, every second of the captain's silence. As he folded his notepad closed, his gaze drifted to the cabin window. The clouds beyond looked soft, harmless, like they weren't hiding thunder underneath. Back in his seat, Nathan exhaled, slowly. The passengers around him resumed half-hearted conversations. Logan's laughter had stopped. No one knew what was coming. Not yet, but Nathan did. Every injustice leaves an echo. Some men know how to amplify it. The seatbelt light clicked off with a soft chime. Nathan remained seated, his eyes steady, his breath controlled. Around him, passengers sprang up, eager to disembark. Logan stretched his arms with theatrical flair, flashing a smug grin as if he had claimed some invisible victory. He turned to a nearby traveler and said loudly, "Hope the help learned something about manners today." A few chuckles echoed, not of agreement, but of disbelief. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others simply looked away. But Nathan was already steps ahead. Before Logan could grab his bag, 2 uniformed airport security officers entered the aircraft. Their black boots echoed on the cabin floor, eyes scanning the aisle with mechanical precision. Passengers froze mid-motion. One of the officers, a tall man with sharp features and a clipped voice, stopped beside Logan's seat. "Logan Darren?" the officer asked flatly. Logan looked up, taken off guard. "Yeah, what's this about?" "Step out of the aisle, please. You're being escorted for an incident under in-flight investigation." At the same time, the second officer approached Nathan. His tone was different, measured, calm, respectful. "Dr. Corrin, we'd like to escort you as well. A legal representative is waiting for you at the terminal." Logan barked a laugh as he stood, dusting imaginary lint off his designer blazer. "This is a joke, right? You're taking the so-called servant, too." He gestured at Nathan with a sneer, but no one responded. The officers didn't reply. Instead, they moved with silent precision, guiding both men down the narrow jet bridge. The moment they stepped out into the terminal, the air shifted. Bright lights, flashbulbs, dozens of phones pointed in their direction. Reporters stood behind the terminal glass recording every step. The terminal buzzed with whispers. Logan squinted, visibly unsettled. "What the?" he muttered. "Why are they here?" Nathan didn't answer. He simply walked ahead with quiet resolve. Standing near the gate, waiting calmly with a leather folder tucked under his arm, was Marcel Cade, Nathan's legal advisor. Dressed in a dark navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses, he gave a single nod as Nathan approached. "It's all logged," Marcel said under his breath, barely moving his lips. "The moment you tapped the secure message, the audio stream from your watch uploaded directly to the Avaris cloud. I've already begun compiling the evidence." Nathan glanced sideways as Logan tried to speak with a ground supervisor, pointing and gesturing animatedly. His voice, however, was muffled by the growing presence of media. Marcel motioned with his chin. "Passenger 17C recorded the entire interaction. He's cooperating. Already uploaded it to our secure drive. And one of the reporters out there got tipped by him." Nathan's gaze didn't shift. "The pilot? Still inside. Company's probably advising him not to say anything until Meridian's counsel reviews the footage." Nathan gave a slow nod, the weight of what was coming settling across his shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor. As Logan was ushered down a separate corridor by an airline manager and a security officer, Marcel led Nathan toward a waiting car outside the terminal. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the polished floors of the arrivals area. As they walked, the energy around them changed again. Passengers who had remained silent now parted, stepping aside, offering subtle nods of acknowledgement, of respect. Inside the car, Marcel handed Nathan a tablet. On the screen, the headline already making its way through news feeds and social platforms. Investor mocks Black CEO on flight, pilot silent. The video clip was less than 30 seconds, but it had everything. Logan's raised voice, the word servant, Nathan's composed silence, the attendant's nervous expression. The frame was tight enough to feel intimate, public enough to demand attention. Comments poured in by the thousands. Some were horrified, some apologetic. A few tried to defend Logan, but the tide was turning quickly. "You've ignited something," Marcel said, scrolling through the reactions. "But this isn't about him anymore, is it?" Nathan looked out the window as the terminal shrank behind them. "No," he replied quietly. "It's about what allows him to think he could speak like that and walk away untouched." Marcel leaned back, adjusting his tie. "We go straight to Meridian's executive board tonight. They'll try to pivot, maybe offer a private apology or vague PR statement." "I won't take a statement," Nathan said. "I'll give them evidence. Not just of Logan's behavior, but of the captain's failure to act. Every silence, every deflection, it's all there." Marcel looked at him with cautious admiration. This could open something much larger. "Good," Nathan replied. His voice was calm, resolved. "Then let it echo where silence has settled for too long." The car pulled into the underground entrance of a private executive wing. Nathan adjusted his tie, pulled out the same handwritten notes he had begun on the plane after his laptop was destroyed, and stepped into the elevator without a word. He wasn't walking into a boardroom. He was walking into the first chamber of accountability. And as the elevator doors closed behind him, the words he'd written at the bottom of the last page echoed in his mind, a reminder of why he had chosen silence not out of weakness, but purpose. When silence protects cruelty, exposure becomes the loudest form of justice. "Servant!" The word crackled like thunder across social media, stitched into looped videos that replayed every angle, every grimace, every second of Logan Darren's arrogant tirade aboard Flight 742. Within hours, the footage had crossed platforms, picked up by news outlets, commentaries, and trending hashtags. Logan's face, twisted in mockery, became the digital emblem of unchecked privilege. But behind the uproar, in the quiet hum of his office, Dr. Nathan Corrin watched without reaction. His fingers rested still on his desk. The video was not the story. It was only the match. The fire had yet to come. Nathan didn't call a press conference. He didn't post a statement. He didn't tweet. His silence created its own vacuum, one that the media filled with guesses, assumptions, and rising tension. But while the world demanded words, Nathan made calls. First, to Meridian Air's Ethics Committee. "I'd like to request an emergency review of a passenger incident involving myself," he said over speakerphone, his voice calm but deliberate. There was a pause, the kind that suggested emails were already flying behind the scenes. A male voice, flat, professional, responded. "Dr. Corrin, we understand there was some misunderstanding between two passengers. Our internal protocol advises we wait for the captain's official incident report." "I helped write your internal ethics framework," Nathan replied, leaning forward, eyes steady on the horizon beyond his office window. "This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a structural failure, and I have proof." Another pause, this one longer. Then, "What kind of proof?" Nathan pressed a button on his watch. A file began uploading through a secured link, an audio clip embedded from the moment he sat down on the plane to the moment the seatbelt light clicked off. No edits, no commentary, just the raw recording. "You'll want to pay attention," Nathan said softly. "At timestamp 001409. The insult is repeated 3 times. Captain Rell remains silent. That silence is the problem." Less than 2 hours later, Meridian's legal department responded, not with dismissal, but concern. They requested a private hearing. Nathan agreed but added one condition. He would bring legal counsel. Behind closed doors, Meridian's legal head, a sharply dressed man named Grant Holler, met Nathan in a conference suite near Arcadia's corporate district. The room was quiet, gray, and sterile, just like the tone in Holler's voice. "We'd prefer to handle this discreetly, Dr. Corrin," Holler began, hands folded, eyes skimming a document in front of him. "You understand the volatility of public interpretation." Nathan didn't flinch. "Volatility happens when people feel they've been ignored. I'd rather give them reason to believe change is possible. We can issue an internal review," Holler offered, "perhaps even a crew suspension." "I'm not here to request suspensions," Nathan interrupted. "I'm here to test your values. You can either honor the system you claim to uphold or admit it was only ever decorative across the table." Holler stiffened. "Is that a threat?" Nathan leaned back. "It's a mirror. Look into it carefully." The meeting ended with tension crackling just beneath the surface. As Nathan stepped out into the afternoon light, his phone buzzed. Marcel Cade, his legal advisor, had arrived at Meridian's downtown office. "They're scrambling," Marcel said, "but they'll try to soften the story before it gains more traction. Expect a watered-down statement." Sure enough, by evening, Meridian Air released a public notice. "We regret a disagreement between passengers aboard Flight 742. While unfortunate, it remains under internal review." The word disagreement set the internet ablaze. Within minutes, public figures, commentators, and legal experts began dissecting the language. The clip of Logan yelling, "Servant," now ran side by side with Meridian's neutral phrasing. Outrage swelled again, but Nathan still didn't speak. He let the weight of his restraint build pressure. Meanwhile, Logan Darren, cornered and humiliated, posted a short video in front of a marble fireplace, hands folded, smile tight. "I regret the humorous misunderstanding that occurred on my flight," he said. "It was never my intent to offend." His voice was smug, insincere. The apology had the texture of something drafted by a publicist on autopilot. Logan called the moment a cultural miscommunication. He never said Nathan's name. Back at Avera Systems, Nathan stood before a whiteboard scribbled with timelines and personnel charts. Marcel walked in, holding a printed transcript of Logan's video. "He's pretending it was a joke," Marcel said, tossing it on the table. Nathan shook his head. "Let him. Silence has weight. If I speak now, it resets the stage. But if I wait, it tightens the noose," Marcel finished. Nathan glanced at the folder resting beside him. Copies of the full audio log, passenger witness statements, internal emails he'd received from crew members too nervous to speak publicly. "Some silences aren't passive," Nathan said, voice steady. "They're precision, waiting for an echo." The recording clicked on. Logan's voice echoed through the conference room speakers with venomous clarity. "Sit down, boy." Then came silence, sharp, prolonged, and unmistakable. No protest, no correction, just the dead air of indifference. The room held its breath. Captain Dorian Rell shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the knot of his tie suddenly feeling tighter. He kept his eyes on the far wall, avoiding Nathan Corrin's calm, unwavering gaze. The other board members of Meridian Air sat in a semicircle behind the long oak table, hands clasped or fiddling nervously with pens. A faint hum from the overhead light buzzed above them, but otherwise the room was gripped by a sudden stillness. Rell cleared his throat. "At the time, I feared any intervention might escalate the situation," he said, his voice noticeably thinner than it had been moments ago. "My priority was the safety of the cabin." Nathan remained seated, fingers laced before him. His face revealed no outward anger, only something deeper, colder, disappointment. "Fear of escalation doesn't justify permission by silence," he said evenly, allowing the words to land without force, like a blade resting on a table rather than being drawn. When someone yells fire, you don't let the match stay lit because putting it out might be messy. Rel looked toward the board for support, but found only lowered eyes and uncomfortable expressions. One of the executives, Jonas Harvin, Meridian's director of operations, cleared his throat and asked softly, "Dr. Corin, do you have a recommendation?" "I do," Nathan replied, "but not a punishment." Several heads turned, surprised. Rel blinked in confusion, and even Marcel Cade, Nathan's attorney seated beside him, leaned forward slightly, waiting. Nathan's tone shifted from calm to resolute. "I'm proposing a complete cultural reform audit across all Meridian flights and departments, independent, transparent, and led by a Vera Systems Behavioral Ethics Division." He paused, letting that sink in. "Not just because of what happened to me, but because this system isn't built to correct itself from the inside." There was an immediate ripple of murmurs among the board. A reform audit meant every employee interaction, every internal report, every complaint swept under the rug would be reviewed. It meant vulnerability, exposure. "Dr. Corin," Harvin said carefully, "you're asking for access to sensitive company operations. This could impact our public image, investor trust." Nathan nodded. "Exactly. That's the point. If reform isn't uncomfortable, it's just branding." From the monitor on the wall, Logan Darren's live video feed suddenly flickered on. Though attending remotely, his voice boomed through the room like a man trying to reclaim lost power. "This is absurd," Logan snapped. "You're letting him push an agenda because of a childish misunderstanding. I was recorded without my consent. You'll hear from my legal team." His face, red with fury, eyebrows raised in disbelief, filled the screen like a portrait of wounded ego. Nathan didn't even turn to look at him. Instead, he glanced at Marcel. Marcel calmly opened a sealed folder and slid it across the table. "We anticipated Mr. Darren's concerns. Inside are signed NDA violations from 3 of his former employees. All allege verbal abuse in corporate settings. All match a behavioral pattern that supports Dr. Corin's claims." Logan's face froze for a split second before the stream cut to black. He had exited the call. The silence that followed felt heavier than Logan's voice had. Rel rubbed his forehead and muttered, "I didn't know it would go this far." Nathan studied him for a moment, then spoke gently but firmly. "It was always this far. You just hadn't landed in it yet?" No one in the room challenged him. Harvin finally leaned forward. "We'll need time to review your proposal. But I'll say this, we need a way out of this mess. If your solution keeps us from repeating this, then it deserves a serious vote." Nathan gave a polite nod. Time is acceptable. Compromise is not. As he stood to leave, Marcel gathered the files methodically. No raised voices, no parting threats. Only the click of Nathan's briefcase and the weight of everything left unsaid. Behind him, the boardroom remained hushed, shaken not just by the incident, but by the realization that the man they had once ignored now held the power to reshape them from the inside. And Logan Darren, watching from wherever he sat, mistook all of it. Nathan's silence, his offer, his restraint, as a sign of weakness. What he didn't know was that Nathan had prepared for that, too. Justice doesn't knock twice. It walks in when you open the wrong door. He called the black CEO his servant, ordering him to fetch water and say, "Sir," sneering as the cabin fell silent. If you believe power isn't about titles but integrity, hit subscribe now, because dignity never bows to hate. The moment the press conference began, the tension in the room snapped like a drawn wire. The lights were harsh. Cameras hummed like static, recording every breath, every blink. Reporters filled the rows with their notepads open, microphones raised, their curiosity barely hiding behind professional distance. Meridian Air's latest statement had been released just hours earlier. A regrettable disagreement between passengers that was resolved peacefully upon landing. The words had poured gasoline on a fire that was already threatening to consume them. Nathan Corrin stepped up to the podium without a teleprompter, flanked by his legal advisor, Marcel Cade. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, and held no notes. His face was unreadable, not angry, not smiling, just composed. Behind him, the Meridian Air logo glowed dimly on a large screen, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. "I won't take long," Nathan began, his voice low but firm. "I've stayed quiet out of respect, for due process, for facts, for restraint. But I won't allow silence to become permission." The flash of a camera cut across his face. Murmurs rustled through the crowd like wind through leaves. "I was called a servant." Repeatedly, loudly, publicly. "I was mocked, humiliated, and ignored by those meant to enforce order," he continued, letting the words settle before adding. "And the official response from Meridian Air is that it was a mere disagreement?" Marcel stood silently to his left, arms crossed, gaze steady on the crowd. Nathan's tone never rose, but each word landed heavier than the last, like weights placed on a fragile shelf. "I don't stand here to ask for revenge. I stand here because the behavior allowed on that flight reflects a deeper blindness, one many corporations have chosen to live with, not just at 30,000 feet, but in boardrooms, on factory floors, in offices. A blindness that mistakes compliance for ethics and image for integrity." Cameras clicked. Several reporters leaned forward. Some wrote furiously. Others simply watched, knowing this was not just another media spin. It was something else, a reckoning. "And when silence flies at 30,000 feet, Nathan said, his voice tightening with controlled resolve, "it lands heavier than gravity." That line didn't just echo. It exploded. Dozens of hands shot up. Questions flew. "Will you sue the airline? Is the pilot being investigated? What are your next steps?" But Nathan had already stepped back from the podium. The press officers cut the mic. There would be no follow-ups today. Outside, the story was already spreading. Within hours, the footage had been clipped, captioned, and uploaded across platforms. Flight 742 trended worldwide. Nathan's closing sentence was quoted in headlines, plastered across news tickers, and echoed by late-night hosts. But while the world was reacting, something else moved quietly behind the scenes. Later that evening, Nathan sat alone in his Arcadia hotel suite, the city lights blinking outside his window like restless signals. Marcel was downstairs handling media inquiries. Nathan's laptop was closed. Instead, he stared at his phone, reading and rereading a single email. Subject: "For your eyes only, they're planning something sender. Unknown at meridianprotonmail.com." There was no greeting, just a short paragraph and a file attachment. The message read, "He was supposed to be protected. They're going to blame you. Recording attached. Delete after listening." Nathan's heart thudded once. His thumb hovered over the file. Then, with a breath, he tapped play. The audio was faint at first. Office sounds in the background. A phone ringing. Then, voices. "We can't throw Rel under the bus, not after all the PR training. He followed the playbook. He froze. Doesn't matter. If this hits the media, we shift the narrative. Say Corrin was hostile, that he provoked it. Paint it as a personality clash. He has influence. Government ties. You want to pick that fight?" A pause. Then the second voice said, "Lower now. If he takes it public, we bury him in policy." Click. The recording ended. Nathan didn't move. He sat completely still, eyes fixed on the darkened screen. The glow from the city lights flickered across the glass like the reflection of fire. When Marcel returned, Nathan played the file without a word. When it ended, Marcel didn't speak for a moment. Then, "They're not afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being exposed." Nathan nodded once. "Then let's make them visible." He forwarded the audio to his private server, encrypted it, and uploaded a backup to Avaris's legal vault. He didn't know who had sent it, but he understood what it meant. Meridian wasn't just trying to cover up negligence. They were preparing to turn him into the aggressor, and they thought they could do it without consequence. But they had underestimated the power of truth paired with patience. The next day, Nathan received confirmation from a tech associate. The metadata showed the recording had been created inside Meridian's own compliance division. Someone on the inside still believed in accountability. The anonymous voice had become a shadow ally. Nathan stared at the file name as he renamed it for archiving. Vault 742 Whispers.mp3. Later that night, as the city slept and the internet surged with debate, Nathan opened his notepad and began outlining his next steps, not just for himself, but for every passenger, every employee, every silent witness who had ever been told to look the other way. When truth rises too high, shadows scramble to catch it. Nathan pressed play. The grainy audio crackled for a moment, then snapped into clarity. The voice of a Meridian executive, low, steady, too calm for what was being said, filled the room. "If we frame it as a misunderstanding," the voice said, "then we avoid escalation. Our legal team has used that before. Works like a charm." Silence followed, not just on the recording, but in the room itself. Nathan sat in the dim light of Marcel Cade's downtown office, staring at the screen as if it might breathe. Marcel leaned back slowly in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. The weight in the room spoke for itself. "This," Nathan said, voice low and controlled, "was sent anonymously to my secure inbox." Marcel narrowed his eyes. "From where?" "I checked the metadata," Nathan replied. "It came from inside Meridian. Specifically, their compliance division." Marcel let out a slow breath, pushing his chair back and standing. He walked toward the window but didn't look out. "If we drop this audio now," he said, "they'll scream blackmail. They'll twist it, Nathan, paint you as unstable, a corporate saboteur. You know how this game works." "I'm not playing a game anymore," Nathan replied, voice flat. Marcel turned around. "Then we need to make sure you're not walking onto the board blind." They spent the next 3 hours dissecting every byte of the file. Embedded in the header was a single clue, ED. It wasn't part of the original file name. It had been added deliberately in the internal notes of the file properties, like a whisper left behind for only the right eyes to find. By 8:30 p.m., they'd tracked the name to a maintenance technician listed in Meridian's internal payroll, Elric Doran. Age 42. Worked late-night rotations. No social media, no public presence. A ghost in the system. Nathan didn't wait. He sent a single encrypted message through an anonymous email drop requesting a meeting. Neutral location, no cameras, no phones. The reply came 20 minutes later. Corner of 9th and Elridge. Midnight. Come alone. The garage was nearly abandoned, the kind of place that reeked of old oil and colder secrets. Nathan stepped through the broken chain-link gate, wind tugging at the collar of his coat. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust. Overhead, a flickering fluorescent buzzed above a stairwell leading into shadow. A figure emerged from the far side of the lot, hunched beneath a dark hood. His movements were cautious but not afraid, just tired. The man approached slowly, stopping a few feet from Nathan. "Elric Doran?" Nathan asked quietly. The man hesitated, then pulled down his hood. Pale eyes, calloused hands, grease under the nails. "You're braver than most," Elric muttered, "or more desperate." "Depends on the day," Nathan replied. "Why now?" Elric reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, worn and wrapped in masking tape. "Because I couldn't watch it anymore," he said. "The way they talk in there. The way they laugh. You were never the first. You were just the first to stay quiet long enough to hear the whole conversation. He handed Nathan the drive. Their fingers brushed for a second. Cold skin. Warm resolve. "What's on it?" Nathan asked. "Chat logs, internal memos, years of it. They've been tracking incidents like yours for a while, classifying them, rewriting them. You ever wonder why every racial complaint ends up labeled a misunderstanding?" Elric's eyes burned with something old. "Because they make it one." Nathan stared at the drive. It felt heavier than metal. "You know they'll come after you," he said quietly. Elric shrugged. "They already did." "My badge stopped working this morning." Nathan nodded once. "I'll protect you." "No," Elric said. "You expose them." "That's how you protect me." Later that night, back in Marcel's office, Nathan sat with the flash drive open on the monitor. Lines of text scrolled down the screen like confessions whispered in the dark. Executives joking about complaints, planning PR responses before the facts were even reviewed, shaping narratives like clay. Flag the complaint as tone-sensitive. Use the misunderstanding protocol if media asks. If the subject is black, suggest emotional misreading of intent. It was no longer about Logan. That man's insults had only lit the match. What Nathan saw now was the system that had handed him the matchbook and taught him how to strike. Marcel looked over from the corner, lips tight. "You're going to war with the machine, Nathan." "I know," Nathan said, eyes on the screen. "We're not fighting a man's insult. We're fighting the machine that taught him how to deliver it." The next morning, they filed the federal discrimination complaint. The moment you turn on the light, even walls begin to confess. The offer came in silence, delivered not with ceremony but through a sealed envelope slid across the table by a Meridian Air executive whose eyes never quite met Nathan Corrin's. The room was cold, by design, no doubt, its minimalist glass walls making it feel more like a sanitized holding cell than a corporate meeting space. Nathan didn't touch the envelope. He didn't need to. "We understand the incident has caused reputational discomfort," said Merrill Heston, a senior legal liaison for Meridian. His suit was immaculate, voice rehearsed, tone carefully neutral. "The board believes this resolution benefits all parties." Nathan sat perfectly still. No anger, no visible disgust. Just the measured stillness of a man who had already played out this conversation in his head a dozen times. "You think this is about discomfort?" he asked, voice low, controlled. His fingertips gently touched the table, not the envelope. "A man screamed 'servant' at me in your cabin, spilled his drink on my work, and your pilot let it happen." Merrill shifted uncomfortably but kept the smile frozen in place. "We deeply regret the situation. Hence, the compensation. $7.2 million. Tax exempt." With a clause for mutual non-disclosure, Nathan finally looked at the envelope, not as a recipient but as a witness to the very culture it symbolized. "And if I don't take it?" he asked. There was a pause. "The board may interpret further public statements as personal activism, not aligned with corporate cooperation." He let the silence hang. Then he stood, slow and calm, collecting nothing. "Then let them interpret," he said. That night, in a quiet conference room several blocks away, Nathan met with his attorney, Marcel Cade, and a pair of federal ethics investigators. The room was dimly lit, a single desk lamp casting long shadows on the paperwork spread before them. The audio clips had already been submitted, and the metadata authenticated. But Nathan had more. He proposed an initiative, not a personal vendetta, but a national shift. "I want a federal charter that mandates cultural audits for all commercial airlines," he said, pointing to the draft he and his ethics team at Averis had prepared. "Public. Transparent. Annual." One of the investigators, a tall man named Carl Brenner with a skeptical brow, leaned forward. "That's not a minor ask." "You want oversight that touches every crew, every airline?" Nathan nodded. Because silence at 30,000 feet doesn't stay up there. It lands in boardrooms, policy, training manuals. If we don't confront it, we legitimize it. Carl looked at Marcel, who simply said, "He's not asking. He's offering a road to redemption before someone else burns it down." Meanwhile, Logan Darren had disappeared. Media crews swarmed his former office, only to find the doors shuttered and his investment group announcing internal restructuring through a brief, hollow press release. The last anyone saw of him was a grainy photo in a parking garage, ducking into a black sedan. Nathan didn't celebrate the fall. He barely acknowledged it. "The moment you enjoy collapse," he once told Marcel, "you risk becoming what you stood against." The real trial was yet to come. 3 weeks later, Nathan entered the hearing room with steady steps and a mind sharper than ever. Federal panels lined the front, senators, regulators, industry heads. The atmosphere was brittle, expectations high. News cameras waited outside, but inside, it was Nathan's words that would carry weight. Across from him sat Captain Dorian Rell, visibly thinner than before, his face drawn and tired. This was not the same man who'd kept silent mid-flight. This was someone who had lived with that silence ever since. "Captain," asked the lead panelist, "can you confirm that you chose not to intervene during the in-flight altercation between Mr. Darren and Dr. Corrin?" Rell nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "And why?" Rell looked at Nathan, then down at his folded hands. "Because I was instructed not to intervene if it involved premium passengers. We're trained to de-escalate, not provoke those deemed sensitive to confrontation." Murmurs rippled across the room. Nathan watched, his expression unreadable. "You're saying you were following company policy?" the senator pressed. "I'm saying I was following a spoken culture, not a written one." We all knew what silence meant. We just didn't say it aloud. Rell's voice cracked slightly. And for that, I was wrong. Later, as the hearing recessed, reporters shouted for comments. Nathan said little. He stood before the cameras with calm clarity, addressing the press not with fury but with a clear message. "I didn't refuse that settlement because I wanted attention," he said. "I refused because silence cannot be bought, and dignity isn't negotiable. If our skies are to carry millions safely, they must also carry the weight of equality." By evening, headlines lit up. CEOs Stan Sparks' national inquiry, pilot confirms racial bias pressure from airline executives, senator calls for aerial ethics reform. As Marcel handed Nathan a folder of testimonies gathered from other passengers and whistleblowers, he remarked, "You've started a fire." Nathan didn't look away from the courtroom, then let it burn through the rot. It would be months before new policies passed, years before their effect was fully seen. But on that day, the nation witnessed something rare, not a man fighting for revenge, but a man pushing for reckoning. And in a quiet voice that evening, as he reviewed the final statement that would go into federal archives, Nathan wrote the last line himself before signing. The insult began with one man's mouth, but it ended exposing an entire industry's silence. The moment Nathan Corrin opened the confidential personnel file on his secure tablet, something in the air around him shifted. The page didn't just list names, it whispered betrayal. There they were, 5 newly appointed senior advisors at Meridian Air's Ethics and Reform Division. On the surface, their resumes were spotless. Ph.D.S. Legal consultants, behavioral analysts. But a cross-check through Avaris's archived compliance database revealed a darker connection. Each man had, at one point or another, worked under Vexel Group, a notorious consultancy firm blacklisted 3 years prior for falsifying employee surveys, suppressing whistleblower reports, and designing what the media had once called institutional camouflage. Nathan's fingers paused above the screen. Vexel. The same group Logan Darren had defended in a 2022 summit as a disruptive ethical strategy firm. the same group whose collapse had triggered government investigations in 3 countries. And now, fragments of it had re-emerged, rebranded, rehired, and embedded quietly into Meridian Air's Reform Task Force. He leaned back in his chair, the conference room dim except for the glow from the tablet and the gentle hum of air conditioning. Outside the glass wall, the skyline of Arcadia City stretched under a pale gray dusk. The committee meeting had adjourned 2 hours ago, and Nathan had stayed behind, reviewing files while the others departed with polite nods and tired small talk. He wasn't tired. He was calculating. His mind raced, not with rage, but with clarity. Meridian's sudden cooperation, their invitation for him to help draft the Aerial Integrity Charter, their willingness to accept accountability, it hadn't been rooted in conscience. It had been theater. Sleek, expensive theater designed to placate investors, silence critics, and let the storm pass unnoticed. They hadn't learned from Flight 742. They had studied it, dissected it, and spun a performance so polished it looked like progress. Nathan stood slowly, walking to the window. Reflected in the glass, his eyes didn't blink. He remembered Logan's sneer on the flight, the quiet chuckle after calling him servant, the smug look when he spilled water onto the laptop. And now, even in disgrace, Logan's reach had left fingerprints on a process meant to cleanse the industry. A familiar ache stirred in Nathan's chest, not of pain, but of weight. The weight of knowing too much and trusting too little. The next morning, Nathan met with Marcel Cade at a quiet booth in the back of a cafe near the Capitol Square. The table between them was empty save for a folder and a pot of black coffee. "They're planting them like seeds," Nathan said, voice low, eyes scanning the crowd for no one in particular. Marcel leaned forward, flipping the folder open. "These names, are you sure they're connected to Vexel?" Nathan nodded once. "Confirmed. Alias swaps, domain redirects, overlapping shell companies. I've got timestamps and financial trails. One of them even used a Vexel server to email Meridian's board 6 months ago." Marcel didn't speak immediately. His expression shifted from curiosity to something harder, colder. Then the board never intended to clean house. "They just built a new one behind curtains," Nathan's gaze sharpened. "Exactly. And the curtain has to fall, on my timing." Marcel sipped his coffee. "You want a media leak?" "No," Nathan replied. "I want a trap. Let them finish hiring. Let them believe I'm still playing along. Then we drop everything, full exposure. But not until the ethics charter is finalized and adopted into federal mandate. If we burn them too soon, the industry slips away." Marcel exhaled slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're turning their playbook into a confession booth." "Not yet," Nathan said, "but I'm opening the door." Over the next several weeks, Nathan operated in dual worlds. In public, he was the calm architect of the Aerial Integrity Charter, attending hearings, holding roundtables, refining policies on crew conduct and psychological screenings. He gave speeches that made headlines, always centering dignity and reform. But in private, he cataloged every document Meridian submitted, cross-referencing metadata, tracing origins, studying behavioral inconsistencies in board responses. He noticed phrases repeating in email correspondence: optical compliance, brand cleansing, public pacification models. These weren't terms of morality. They were vocabulary of illusion. One night, deep in the Avari's data forensics lab, Nathan stood over a whiteboard filled with names, arrows, and encrypted file references. Elric Doran, now promoted as Director of Compliance for the Corin Foundation, entered holding a USB drive. "This is from last week's internal sync at Meridian," Elric said. "They didn't scrub it clean." One of the hires slipped and mentioned impression laundering during a slide review. Nathan accepted the drive and slid it into the console. "Every slip is a thread. We keep pulling until the fabric falls apart." Hours passed as Nathan isolated the clip, enhanced the audio, and labeled it. The speaker, one of the rebranded Vexel affiliates, had used the phrase casually, "We need to remember that this isn't about deep reform, it's about strategic remorse." That was the line. That was the headline. Nathan looked at Elric. "This is the proof we need. Not just corruption, but choreography." Elric nodded. "They think they're controlling the narrative." "They are," Nathan replied calmly, "until they forget who wrote the first sentence." And so, Nathan waited. With the charter's final presentation date drawing near, he planned every moment, every file he would reveal, every face that would be in the room, the applause they thought they'd hear, and the silence they weren't ready for. And all the while he wore the same composed expression that had disarmed Logan Darren months ago. When the curtain falls, not every actor realizes the play has already ended. The lights dimmed. A single beam from the projector ignited the massive screen behind Dr. Nathan Corrin, casting a pale glow over the silent press hall. Rows of chairs filled with government officials, media correspondents, industry executives, and Meridian Air's full board faced forward, unmoving. Camera lenses glinted like a line of watchful eyes. Nathan stood at the podium in a tailored charcoal gray suit, crisp and unassuming. His hands rested lightly on the sides, shoulders squared but relaxed. His voice had not yet spoken, but the silence already held weight. Then the screen shifted. First, a date, April 4th, appeared in bold white text. Beneath it, a corporate logo, Turnian Strategies Limited. Then came the first encrypted email transcript, decrypted and displayed in sharp clarity. Nathan's voice broke the silence. "This," he said, gesturing calmly toward the display, "is where the narrative was pre-written." Gasps scattered like dropped pins. On screen, the email read, "If Corrin doesn't accept the settlement, we frame him as an extremist, position it as an anti-corporate stunt, paint it as activism rather than ethics." It was dated 2 days before Meridian had offered Nathan their confidential payout. The audience didn't move. Even the clicking of cameras slowed as every eye locked on the unfolding evidence. One by one, emails continued to appear, each time-stamped, each signed by Meridian executives or their intermediaries. Nathan let each document breathe on the screen before he spoke again. "This wasn't crisis management," he said, his voice measured, the edges sharp as glass. "This was character assassination, planned before character was even questioned." He turned his head slowly. On the front row sat Meridian's board chairman, Halvin Doric, stiff as marble. His tie appeared too tight. The muscles in his jaw worked nervously, and a single bead of sweat began its slow crawl down the side of his temple. The next slide lit up the room. A diagram appeared, an internal timeline of Meridian's partnerships with third-party firms, leading straight to Logan Darren's investment group. On a straight red line connecting names and payments, one caption read, "PR Risk Subversion. Fund approved by Darren. Authorized via silent vote. See Record 1442.2c." Gasps turned into murmurs. Whispers spread across the press row. Marcel Cade, Nathan's attorney, stood by the wall with his arms crossed, his eyes locked on the board's expressions. He leaned subtly toward one of the legal correspondents, whispering just loud enough, "They didn't see this coming because they thought silence was the plan." Nathan continued, voice unshaken. "This wasn't a disagreement. It was orchestration. If I had stayed quiet, you wouldn't be reading these emails. You'd be reading headlines about an angry CEO who refused to cooperate." His gaze swept the room, controlled, direct. But I wasn't angry. I was listening. Another slide clicked into place, a payment receipt. A transfer from Meridian Air's internal legal fund to a crisis consultancy group flagged 3 years ago for data manipulation. The company had changed its name twice since then. But the signature on the transfer? Halvin Doric. The chairman sat frozen. His aide leaned over, whispering something quickly into his ear. Doric didn't react. He stared at the screen like it had shown him his own obituary. Nathan inhaled. Then he stepped slightly away from the podium, letting his body language shift from presenter to witness. I was told that accepting the payout would help calm the waters, that it would bring closure to an unfortunate misunderstanding. But closure doesn't come through silence. It comes through sunlight. On the far right of the stage, a large meridian banner had been set up, blue and silver, clean and polished. Nathan glanced at it for the briefest second before turning back to the crowd. "You don't fix corrosion by painting over it," he said, voice quiet again. "You fix it by peeling everything back, even if it makes people uncomfortable." Especially then, cameras flashed. Reporters' hands moved frantically across keyboards. Behind him, the screen darkened to a single line of text. "Encrypted archive link, full timeline, accessible via Federal Ethics Committee portal." The gesture wasn't symbolic. It was evidence made permanent. Nathan returned to the podium, gripped it lightly once more, and let his gaze meet that of the press. He didn't blink. This isn't about one flight or one insult. It's about how quickly systems choose comfort over conscience. Reform without truth is theater. I prefer honesty over applause. The room stayed silent, but the message didn't. By the end of that day, media headlines raced across screens in every time zone. Dr. Nathan Koren exposes Meridian's hidden agenda. Board chairman resigns following ethics bombshell. From silence to system reform, the Aerial Integrity Charter becomes federal law. And in a quiet message days later, one man wrote to Nathan in private, "Captain Rell here. I watched your press event. You taught me something I never thought I'd hear from silence." That moment meant more than applause, because some men win by shouting louder, others by simply never lowering their voice. The voice came softly over the speaker system. "Final boarding for Flight 217 to Windmere Valley." Nathan Koren didn't move. He sat in a low, leather-backed seat tucked beside Gate C9 of Arcadia International, watching a steady stream of travelers file past beneath a massive backlit display. Above them glowed an emblem, polished, pristine, and draped in blue. Integrity Charter Certified Airline, Meridian Air. His eyes narrowed slightly. A year ago, that name had nearly buried his dignity beneath silence and laughter. Now, it stood elevated on banners and boarding passes, touted as the gold standard for ethical reform in aviation. The irony lingered in the air like stale perfume, but it didn't sting. It stirred something else. A father walked by with his teenage son, their conversation casual. "They say Meridian's the safest now," the boy muttered, adjusting the strap of his backpack. The man nodded. "Not just safe." Fair Nathan's fingers relaxed on the spine of the leather folder resting on his lap. Inside were the final drafts of new policy reviews, global adoption metrics, and a revised ethics compliance roadmap. But his gaze wasn't on the numbers. It was on the symbol. "Strange," he murmured aloud, "to watch your opponent wear the mask of your victory." Footsteps approached from his left. A man in his mid-30s with rolled sleeves, neatly cropped hair, and a crisp badge clipped to his belt stood beside him. "Elric Doran," Nathan said without turning. "Dr. Koren," Elric replied with a warm smile. "The display's brighter than it was in the mock-ups." "It's not the brightness that matters. It's that people look up when they see it," Nathan responded, then finally looked over at the man who once risked his entire career to send a drive full of secrets. Elric sat down beside him, pulling out a tablet from his satchel. "You were right. The ethics compliance reports from the last quarter, 10 out of 12 companies modeled their system after the charter." Nathan didn't reply at first. He was watching a young flight attendant across the terminal help an elderly man find his gate, her gestures patient, her smile unforced. Elric followed his gaze. "Sometimes I wonder," Elric said, quieter now. How different things might have been if you hadn't boarded that flight. Nathan's expression didn't change. Sometimes I wonder how many others boarded worse ones and never said a word. Elric nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. Logan's name came off another building this week, Elric added after a moment. His fund's last project lost its final backers. Nathan didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply took in the information as one more ripple in a pond already stilled. Some men build empires to last. Others build facades that fall the moment someone touches the paint. Their moment of quiet was broken by the announcement of boarding for his flight. "Time to go?" Elric asked, standing. Nathan followed suit, sliding the folder into his briefcase and adjusting his charcoal gray coat. As they approached the gate, a male attendant greeted them politely. "Dr. Corrin," the young man said, recognizing him immediately. "Please, priority boarding. You've been pre-cleared." Nathan's nod was subtle but appreciative. "Thank you." As he stepped onto the jet bridge, the scent of engine oil and recycled cabin air met him, oddly comforting. Elric remained behind, heading toward a different gate. They exchanged a simple look, no words needed. Inside the cabin, Nathan moved down the aisle toward seat 3A. It was quiet, the plane not yet full. He paused near the window and looked out. The sun had just begun to break past the morning clouds, casting soft gold onto the runway. The light glinted across the wing, clean and sharp, like a blade sharpened by struggle but now resting in its sheath. A different flight, a different man, a different silence. As he settled into his seat, the male flight attendant passed by again, gently placing a glass of water on the table beside him. "Let us know if you need anything, Dr. Corrin," he said respectfully. Nathan looked at him, not as a reminder of the past, but as a sign of what had changed. He turned back to the window. A group of ground crew were loading luggage, their movements swift and practiced. One of them looked up briefly and nodded toward the cockpit. Nathan followed the gesture and saw the pilot glance back through the glass partition, then raise a hand in quiet acknowledgement. He remembered something his father once told him. A man isn't remembered for the battles he wins. He's remembered for how he carries the burden of being right when the world insists he's wrong. Nathan had carried that burden, and now it had carried him somewhere greater. The overhead lights dimmed. The engines began to hum. The cabin gently vibrated with promise. He took a long breath, letting it settle deep in his chest. Respect, he thought, isn't given by power. It's earned by what you choose to endure in silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest victory of all. He tried to turn a man into a servant and stood speechless when the pilot refused to stand by him. If you believe real strength stands for what's right, subscribe now, because justice doesn't need wings to fly. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It examines racism, arrogance, and the courage it takes to stand against discrimination even in small moments of everyday life. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage respect and equality in all interactions.